later for you guys to watch, or if you have friends that want to watch this later. I always like to do that for my Tuesday classes, so just in case you missed it. I'm also going to share my slides with you, so if you guys don't mind giving me a thumbs up when you see my slides, that way I know we're all on the same page. So you should see the first slide that says, "Who am I?" With my name, got a thumbs up. Perfect. If you guys are able to and willing, if you could turn on your cameras as well. If not, that's okay. I understand some of you may not be in a place where you can't turn on your camera. But I like to tell my Tuesday class, I like to make jokes throughout my presentation. And I got to see how well, those jokes perform. So I need to see your faces to see if you're laughing at my jokes. And again, if not, you can't turn on the camera. That's perfectly fine. But to kick it off, a little bit more about me. Jamila gave an excellent introduction, so thank you. But again, from Albany, New York, originally, so that's about 2 hours north of New York City. I've actually only been in New York City maybe twice, 3 times in my entire life. So if you live upstate, you usually don't go down to the city all that often unless you're working. But grew up in New York, absolutely loved it. From there, I moved to Texas and went to Baylor University. It's in a small town called Waco. Some of you may have heard of it. It's near Dallas, big city in Texas. And I graduated in 2019 with my undergraduate degree, with a degree in Russian language. From there, I moved to Washington, D.C. for work and started going to Johns Hopkins for my graduate degree at night on campus, but then COVID hit and they shut everything down and all classes moved online. And then as COVID, it was only supposed to be 2 weeks. That's what they told us in the United States. It'll be over in 2 weeks. That did not happen, obviously. So they kept everything online for Johns Hopkins and then gave us the option to go back on campus for grad school. But at that point, I was moving to Florida for work. So it worked out perfectly for me to stay online for my graduate degree. So if you guys are interested in about online schools and what that looks like, I'm actually going to give another session in a couple of weeks where I talk about online schools and some of the pros and cons of being able to go to school online. Namely, you can be anywhere in the world, be able to still take classes and get a full degree, and employers look at that degree the same as if you were on campus the full time, but that will be for a different class. So like I said, current location is Florida right now, so near Alabama. So I've kind of been all over the United States in the last couple of years. And then fun fact, I'm a current virtual intern with Education USA. Jamila already mentioned that, so I'll give you another fun fact. I'm really into skateboarding. I've recently picked it up. I'm 25, so I'm a little bit old to be skateboarding at times, and then especially I got to be careful not to injure myself because I'm like not super young anymore. But yeah, I've been really interested in skateboarding. So that's a fun fact about myself. But we're going to move on. And I will say that I'll have this session kind of like we do the Tuesday classes for our college students. And that is, I do like to be very interactive. So I'll ask you guys questions and hopefully you answer, because awkward silence would be uncomfortable. So hopefully we'll have some volunteers to answer some of the questions that I ask. Let's see if this goes to the next slide. I might have to take it out of presentation mode because it doesn't like, it doesn't like my slides. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second before we move on, because I'm going to have to take my slides out of presenter mode. But if you guys are okay with it, I have a question for you. And that question is, if you are intending to study in the United States, and if you are you intending to get a graduate degree from the US? So if someone is willing to try to answer that question, that'd be great. So again, the question is, do you want to study in the United States? And would you like to get a graduate degree? So graduate degree meaning something post-undergrad, so you do your initial 4 years, and then afterwards you'd come to the United States, or if you're already there, and do your undergraduate degree. So see some comments, but if anybody is willing to answer, and then let us know what you intend to study in the United States.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
My name is Sabohat. My name is Sabohat, and I have been studying since 3 years at Tashkent University. And this year, I am going to graduate at the university, and I am going to continue my master degree in USA. And can I work there if I study master in the USA?
Yes, that's a great question. I'm glad you kicked it off by asking a question as well. So you can work. It depends on your visa as well, what your visa status is. But at least if you're on the university, there's quite often jobs for international students in student programs or student work studies. But I will say that also depends on your visa and what you're allowed to do through your visa. So it's a great question to ask the US Embassy when you're applying for your visa, and all the rules surrounding whether you can work or not, and then what types of jobs you can have. Yeah, great question. But is anyone else intending to study in the United States?
Of course. Is there anyone you asked?
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? What are you intending on studying in the United States?
Me, is my voice listenable? Like,
Yep, I can hear you.
yeah, I have done my master's degree in Uzbekistan, and I want to continue like doing PhD in the United States, hopefully. That's all.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'm glad you said PhD because graduate studies is a all-inclusive term in the United States. So we're actually going to talk about PhDs today and what's required to get into a PhD program in the United States. So glad you brought that up. Is there anyone else who plans on studying in the United States to get their graduate degree?
Hi, my name is Shireen. I have a bachelor in Japanese. I graduated from Tashkent University of Oriental Studies, and I applied for graduate degree here. My question is, what would be the next step after I get my graduation degree in here, if I'm gonna apply one of the universities in the United States?
Yeah,
What
that's
would
a great
be the
question as well.
procedures?
So you said you already have your master's degree or graduate degree from Uzbekistan?
Not yet. I just applied, so
Okay.
I'm waiting for some. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great question. And I will say for master's degrees, we're actually going to talk about that in 10 minutes as we're going throughout this class. So I'm going to answer your question probably in about 10 minutes. But if you still have additional questions about master's degrees in the United States, feel free to pause and just ask that question when we get to that slide. Fully intend to answer that question when we get there, if that's okay with you.
Oh, yeah.
All right,
Absolutely.
perfect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right, Ursula, you raised your hand. Do you intend to study in the United States?
Yes, hello everyone. Yeah, sure. I'm thinking about applying for PhD because I have a master's degree in international relations now. I'm trying to research on kind of topic because first thing I think is a proposal for what you are going to do for your PhD or graduate degree. Yeah, actually, I want to study that.
Okay, perfect.
And also, I work as a counselor in a school here, but this is a high school kinda. So our students are preparing for their undergraduate degree. So for information, I'm here. Yeah, thank you for organizing such.
Well, that's perfect. And I'm glad you're here. You definitely are a good counselor to make sure that you understand all that you can about grad studies as well. And even if you're advising, undergraduate or soon to be undergraduate students, I think having a good understanding of graduate programs, so you can tell them, hey, when you go study undergrad, that's great. But also if you want to become a doctor, maybe not the best undergraduate. But yeah, perfect. All right. Is there anybody else who plans on studying in the United States for their graduate degree? All right. So I'm sure a couple of you still plan on studying, and hopefully if you're in your undergrad or in high school right now, maybe you'll consider after this studying in the United States. But we're going to move on. I know there's a couple people in the chat. I will say I'm bad at multitasking.
So I
so,
want to have,
if you have
ask a question.
Oh, is somebody asking a question?
Yes. How do you think would it be better if we will study in Uzbekistan 2 years and 2 years in USA?
That's a good question. So I will say it depends on what your ultimate goal is. So if you're intending to go live and stay in the United States, like long term, then it might be a little bit better to get your degree in the United States. Or if you intend to go back to Uzbekistan and you want your job in Uzbekistan requires you to have like international study experience, then it might be a better option for you to go to the United States, study, and then come back. Doesn't necessarily have to be the United States either, but I think that's really dependent upon your personal goals and where you see yourself in a couple of years. I will say there is no right answer for everyone. It depends on what you want to do in the future. All right, looks like we got one more question, and then I am going to move on because I want to make sure we get through all the information that we have to. So Khadisha, it looks like you got your hand raised. So I'll take your question and then we'll move on.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Is my voice is audible?
Yes.
So currently I study at Terma State University in Uzbekistan. And I'm a third year student here. So, and my field is tourism, and I wanna study my master degree in the US related to my related to tourism sector, and which university is better or good in the USA to study in tourism?
That's a good question as well. So again, it goes back to what your goals are ultimately. So nearly every school in the US will have some type of like tourism or hospitality degree. So it really comes down to what are you looking for? So it could be there's a certain part of the United States you want to study in, like you want to study in New York and you don't want to study in Kansas. So then I would look for schools in New York. Or if you're like, hey, I want to go to the cheapest option available, then I would look for schools that are cheaper and relatively low cost of living in that area so that you can attend the school a little bit cheaper. So again, that kind of goes back to what your personal goals are, which you're going to hear me say a lot during this class, because everyone wants to know like, hey, what is the best degree from the best university? And I will say that all depends on what you're looking for. So are you looking for a certain area in the United States to study? Are you looking for, cost of living? Are you looking for the cheapest university? Are you looking for the most expensive university with the best name? So I think that all depends on what you're looking for. But that's a good question. That answers it a little bit.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, Khadisha, I know you have your hand raised, but we are going to move on because I know you guys have lots of questions, and I love that. I love that you guys are engaged, but I want to make sure we get through all the information, and then we'll still have plenty of time for questions as we go throughout. Because I know a lot of your questions are probably going to be answered as we go throughout. But Khadisha, if for whatever reason I don't answer your question throughout, then please feel free to stop me at the end and ask the question. But we're going to move on to why advanced degrees. And everything I talk about today will be from the perspective of studying in the United States. So when I make, broad claims of like, hey, this is why you want to get your advanced degree, it's more for why you would want to get your advanced degree in the United States. So if you're trying to look for employment in the US, applicants are often required or expected to have advanced degrees today. So before, if you just had your undergraduate in the US, not a lot of people had their undergraduate. So you're pretty much golden for any job that you apply to, but that's kind of changed. I would even say in the last 2 decades where everyone pretty much has their undergraduate degree now. So to set yourself apart, it's almost expected that you have some type of graduate degree in the United States. Not always required for every job, but some of those more advanced skilled jobs, you're required to have an advanced degree. So when we say advanced degree or graduate degree, there's all different types, and we're going to talk about everything that I have on this slide. You guys can see the slides, right? I forgot to ask that because I switched back to the slides. No one's saying no, so I'm guessing you can see the slides, so that's good. But types of advanced degrees, so you've got your master's degree, so we're going to talk about what that looks like today. Your PhD, which a couple of you mentioned that you're looking to get, your JD, so if you're looking to become a lawyer in the United States, what you would be required to get, your MD, so if you want to become a medical doctor, and then your dental surgery. So if you want to become a dentist, then you have to get this degree. But we're going to talk about each one of these and what that looks like. So to start off with, we're going to talk about master's degrees. So if you guys have questions specific to master's degrees, once I finish talking about the slide, if you want to ask about that, feel free to. If you have like questions about PhD and stuff like that, we're going to get to that slide. So don't worry about that. But looking at master's degrees, so what type of degree do you have? So you'll hear something called an MA, an MS, an MFA, and an MBA. They're all master's degrees. So for example, I'm going to Johns Hopkins right now, and I am getting my degree in, it's like an international studies, global security studies. So that will be a master's of arts, which I have that first one right here, Master of Arts. So a Master of Arts is usually like your language degrees, your humanities studies, that will be considered a Master of Arts. So it's still going to be a 2-year program, regardless of what type of master's you get. But on your graduation diploma, you may have something called an MA or an MS. So for example, your Master of Science, that's going to be like your biology, your chemistry. So if you're looking to get your master's in one of those types of science or engineering or mathematics, you'll get your Master's of Science degree. Again, still a 2-year program, but you will have the opportunity to take all the similar classes that you would have to do for either one of those degrees. I will say a Master of Science is a little bit more lab and clinical intensive. So just make sure that when you're signing up for your degrees or applying, you know what type of degree you're asking for, because you may be taking, like, for example, I'm not a math or science person, so I would not want to do a Master of Science because then I would find myself in the lab or a clinical, and I'm not that type of person because I'm not good at math or science. So I went for the Master of Art. And then you have something called an MFA, so your Master of Fine Arts. Again, another 2-year program that you can take at most universities. And that is think of like painting or writing or drawing. So if you want a degree in any of those types of fields, you get a Master of Fine Arts. And then your final one is your MBA. So your Master of Business Administration. This is a degree that you would get if you wanted to go work for like a big business firm or a big business company in the United States. So again, the length of time for all these degrees, they're different names, but they're all master's degrees regardless, is 2 years. And that's if you're going to school full time. So who's typically required to get a master's degree? And again, this is for if you're living and working in the United States. So you may have different requirements in Uzbekistan, that's completely fine. But business people are often required to get their MBA. So I will say your MBA is probably your most standard master's degree, meaning that if I were to apply to most any job in the United States at this point that is business or finance related, they're going to ask me if I have my MBA or if I'm working on my MBA. So that's probably your most standard master's degree. I'm working on my MA, Master of Arts, because probably in my future, I'll work for like the US government and looking at international affairs. So that makes a little bit more sense for me. But even if you work for like the US government, for example, and again, I know you guys will, some of you may work for the Uzbek government in the future. At least in the United States, they may still ask you if you have your MBA, because it's becoming so standard that a lot of US citizens will have their MBA or Master of Business Administration. And then a last type of individual or group required for your master's degree is teachers. So when I say teachers, we're going to talk about university professors are different, but if you want to be a teacher, so if you want to work in elementary education, so with younger children, or if you want to work with high schoolers who are preparing to go to undergraduate, get their undergraduate degree, most teachers in the United States are required to have their master's, and most of the time it will be a master's of arts in teaching. So that's typically a requirement for teachers. So now it used to be like my mom is a teacher, for example, and when she started like 20 plus years ago, it was fine to have her undergraduate degree. But about in her first 5 years of teaching, again, this was a couple years ago, many years ago at this point, in her first 5 years of teaching, her school administration told her it was now a requirement for all teachers at the school to get their master's of arts in teaching. So she had to go back and get her 2-year degree. But that is pretty standard if you are a teacher in the US. Again, different requirements probably in Uzbekistan, but like I said, I'm going to talk from the perspective of what it looks like in the United States. But is there any questions about master's degrees before we move on to PhDs? All right, sounds pretty quiet. Again, like I said, if you guys have questions, I know you are throwing stuff in the chat, feel free to, but like I said, I'm bad at multitasking, so feel free to just raise your hand and ask the question on screen to everybody. But it looks like Shokir, you've got your hand raised. Looks like Shokir, you got your hand raised.
Good evening. Can I ask? I want.
If you have a question, please ask your question.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have a question?
Teacher still has a question.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead. Feel free to ask your question.
Okay, I'm gonna study in the US as a psychology student. I'm gonna ask that which university can give me full scholarship to study in the US?
Okay, so are you looking for like a graduate degree perspective for a full scholarship?
Yes.
Okay, so you'll have to do your research because I don't know all the universities out there and what type of scholarships they offer. I will say, unfortunately, there's more scholarships offered to undergraduate students than there are typically graduate students. There are still scholarships out there. So honestly, what I would do, your best bet is go to College Board. So College Board is what runs your SAT to get into most US schools. That's a requirement for your undergrad. But College Board has a great list of scholarships that are available to undergraduate and graduate students. I will say that most of the scholarships available are not going to cover your full tuition. So you may have to work a little bit because, it'll be a couple $1,000s here and there for the different scholarships. But if you apply to those and get those will add up. The reason that typically graduate students don't get full scholarships or as many scholarships as you would for undergrad is because, at least in the United States, it's expected that you're either working when you're getting your graduate degree, or at least you have some professional experience before you've gotten your graduate degree. So I guess they just assume that you have money, and that's why you can afford to go to graduate school, which isn't always the case. But yeah, so that's why you typically see less scholarships offered versus your undergraduate. That's not to say that there's not scholarships out there. So you definitely need to look. And I won't say there is a university out there that comes to mind that gives you full scholarship, but I would again suggest go to College Board. That'll be, you can Google College Board scholarships, and they have a great list of like 1,000 different scholarships you can apply for. But I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. And which university do you highly recommend me to study as a psychology student?
Again, I'll give my my usual answer, which it depends, right? You're gonna hear me say that a lot, because it all depends on what your goals are. So if you want like the best degree from the best university in the United States, then I would say like your Ivy League schools. So your Harvards, your Yales, like your Brown, your Cornell universities. But it also depends on your personal goals, because maybe you're not required to actually get a degree from Harvard, because a degree from like New York State University will help you meet your goals of being like a psychologist in the United States or in Uzbekistan or somewhere else in the world. So again, it all depends on what your personal goals are, because like, for example, I went to Baylor University for my undergraduate. I got into a school called Georgetown, which I absolutely love that school. It's in Washington, D.C., but they really didn't offer me any scholarships. So I couldn't attend there because Baylor for my undergraduate offered me more scholarships. So that's where it goes back to, yes, Georgetown on paper is a better school than Baylor. But it also, for my own personal, benefit, because I didn't want to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, I chose Baylor for my undergraduate over Georgetown. And it could be the same for you, of what are your ultimate personal goals for when you're studying. But I hope that answers your question. All right. So we're going to move on to PhDs or doctoral degrees. So typically research focused degrees. Someone mentioned this, that typically when you're applying, you have to have a research topic in mind. That is true for the most part. I will say a doctoral degree is a little bit less formal process of when you're applying. So when you're applying to a doctoral degree, typically you already know what you want to research. It's not open-ended, but there is so many different types of doctoral degrees. So you could get a doctor of teaching, a doctor of veterinary medicine, a doctor of international affairs. There's at least probably like 50 different types of doctorates that you can receive. Most of these doctors will take anywhere between 6 to 8 years for full-time study. Usually the first 2 to 4 years is your academic based research. So for example, one summer I studied at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and I was doing an intensive Russian language program, and all of my teachers were PhD students in Russian literature there. So some of them were in their 6th or 7th year, but for their studies, their first 3 to 4 years was intensive Russian language studies, as well as Russian literature studies. And then for the last couple of years, they're writing their final thesis or research paper, as well as teaching. So that's typical of a doctoral or a PhD. Usually those terms are used interchangeably in the United States. But again, it takes up to 8 years. So it is quite a process to get your doctorate degree. Again, that shouldn't be a turnoff for you guys if you're interested in that. It just depends on your goals. Most doctoral students, because you are paying for that degree, but most students will get a little extra money on the side by becoming like university professors, but they'll be considered like teacher assistants. They won't be considered full university professors while they're working on getting their degree. But that's how a lot of graduate students will help finance their degree, as well as get some teaching experience. And then who is typically required to get a doctorate? So that are going to be your researchers. So depending on what field you want to go into, if you want to go into like medical studies and you want to be a researcher, some people will go get their doctoral degree so that they can do like clinical research. And that requires, anywhere from 6 to 8 years, as well as university professors. So whereas I mentioned earlier, teachers for like your secondary education require usually only a master's, which is 2 years. If you want to be a university professor at like a 4-year university or college, you're usually required to have your doctoral degree in the field that you're teaching. So something to consider. Over on the right-hand side, I have a picture of the rows of a doctoral program graduate. I don't know if you guys do something similar, but in the United States, when you graduate, you'll wear your graduation cap and gown, and depending on what you've studied, you'll have more things on your gown. So a PhD student is considered like the highest form of studying. And when I say highest form, I mean like most years required to study. So I don't know what this is called, but they get to wear a neat little cap when they graduate. So if you're in it for the cap and you want to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it, go for it. But yeah, so I think that's a unique thing that they get to wear. Also, interesting fact too, in the United States, so once you graduate with your doctoral degree, you're called a doctor. So it'll be, doctor, whatever your last name is. It can get confusing because medical doctors are also called doctors. So you may see someone with like doctor, like for example, my last name is Dr. or not doctor, but Parker. And if I was a doctor and had my doctoral degree, then I would be Dr. Parker. And your first question would be, do you have a doctoral degree or are you a medical doctor? Because those are two very different things, but they're both called doctors. So interesting facts. If you ask someone, oh, are you a doctor? And they say yes, they may not be able to, conduct surgery on you because they may have their doctor of teaching and they can't do anything medical. But I think that's just interesting that in the US we call both of those types of people that graduate from either medical school or with their doctoral degree doctors. But are there any questions about doctoral degrees or PhDs in general? Again, those terms are interchangeable. All right, well, we're going to move on to a Juris Doctor degree. So many types of degrees, again, all considered graduate degrees. So your Juris Doctor degree or your JD is required for all lawyers in the United States. I will say most lawyers in the United States because it depends on what state you're trying to practice law in. For example, like Vermont, I think California don't require you to go to law school. You just have to pass something called the bar, which is the bar is like it's a huge test that you would have to take in order to be considered a qualified lawyer for that state. So typically you would take the bar after you graduated law school, but not all states require that anymore. Some states say that you can just take the bar and not go to law school. So if you guys know who Kim Kardashian is, a little pop culture, but if you know who Kim Kardashian is, she's a celebrity. What she's famous for, I don't really know, but she's famous. And she is actually trying to get her degree in law, but she's not going to law school. She's actually just going and trying to pass the bar without going to law school, which is allowed in California. But that's a lot of minute detail, which you guys probably don't care about. But overall, if you're looking to become a lawyer in the United States, what are you required to do? So first of all, you have to have your bachelor's before you apply for law school. And then when you're going to law school, in order to apply, most schools require you to take your LSAT, which is your law school admissions test, or your graduate record exam, your GRE. So GRE is the most common one between all these degrees. So for example, your master's degree will typically require you to take a GRE. So I had to take a GRE in order to go to Johns Hopkins. That one, think of just like a SAT, but like a really amped up SAT, a little bit more difficult. So if you think about an SAT, similar to a graduate record exam, but with the understanding that you've probably already done your undergraduate when you're taking this test. But most law schools require the LSAT. So your law school admissions test, over on the right-hand side of the screen, I have a breakdown of the LSAT questions. So whereas like your SAT and your GRE will test what you know and what your knowledge is in general, the LSAT test how you think, which is like difficult to conceptualize because a lot of the questions are nonsensical. So they'll ask you questions that don't have a real answer in life, but they want you to see if you can logically solve a problem. So lots of logic problems, but it's very difficult to score high on the LSAT. So I'm studying for the LSAT right now. I don't know if I want to go to law school, but just in case I do, I want to at least have my LSAT scores. Those are good for, I think, up to 5 years. So even if you're considering law school, most people study anywhere between 6 months to a year for the LSAT before they take the LSAT. So it's not one of those tests that you want to just, go online and take. They do offer an online version of the LSAT now. So you could probably take that in Uzbekistan with a proctor if you're looking to go to law school in the United States. But definitely a test I would study before you actually try to take that. So when you're in law school, it's a 3-year program, and students in the US in US law schools will have the ability to concentrate in different types of law. So if you're interested in international law, your first year, you'll take your basic like constitutional law, your criminal justice law in your first year, and then your second and third year, you're typically starting to concentrate in different fields. So like your cybersecurity law, your international law, your entertainment law. So by the time you graduate, you'll have a full-fledged Juris Doctor degree, but you'll also have a concentration, and that's typically the law that you're going to go practice in the future. And then who's typically required to get a JD? Again, lawyers in the United States. So I don't know what that looks like for you guys in Uzbekistan. If you're required to go to law school, or if you can just take a law test, what our equivalent of the bar is. I don't know why they call it bar. It's kind of weird that they call it the bar, but everyone has to go to the bar and take their test. It's not a physical location, it's just the name of the test that they have to take after law school. But is there any questions about a Juris Doctor degree and what it looks like to go to law school in the United States?
There's a question about LLM, international law. So the question is the job opportunities after graduating and getting the LLM degree, international law.
Yeah, good question. So depends on ultimately what your country accepts for like a law degree, and then what they're okay with you studying, like in the United States. But for example, a lot of people in international law, at least in the United States, will go to work for companies that are international. So those international companies, like for example, like Apple or Google, they may have their headquarters in the United States, but because they operate around the world, they'll require lawyers that have an understanding of law in different countries and how that applies to those companies, even though they may be headquartered in the United States. And then a lot of students who graduate with law degrees and with a concentration in international law, they'll go to example, they'll go work in Europe, look at the World Court, they'll work there. So that's also a different opportunity that you could have if you have a degree in international law. Thank you, Jamila, for helping me out. I know that's probably in the chat. No, hard to balance everything. Is there any other questions about a Juris Doctor degree or your JD?
Yeah, I have. Hi.
Hi.
I joined a little late, so I couldn't catch what you talk about scholarships. Can I get a fully funded scholarship in USA for doctoral?
Yeah, so I'll answer that question really shortly, because I have recorded this session, so the recording will be made available later and you can go back and watch the answer on scholarships. But I will say you can find scholarships, maybe not fully funded ones, but go to College Board, just Google College Board scholarships, because they have a great list of like 100+ scholarships that are available to undergraduates and graduate students in the United States. So not full scholarships, but again, sometimes you have to get a little creative of how you pay for school. So that might mean applying to 10 different scholarships that may only cover a small portion of your overall degree, but those scholarships add up after a while. But good question. Is there any questions about Juris Doctor degree before we move on? Erkin.
Yes, sometimes I'm quite confused because my research proposal is about rule of law, or I want to learn and do research on the origin of rule of law. But I'm not sure which field I need to go. For example, my research question is quite related to jurisprudence or political science. So if I apply for jurisprudence, is it the same requirements that this Juris Doctor degree require?
Yeah, so
what I mean, I didn't graduate any law school, or my undergraduate is not related to law school. But for example, after graduation, after PhD, I don't want to work as a lawyer or someone, but I just want to do research on the field. So is it still required, these requirements?
Yeah, so in your case, I would say like just stick with the PhD or the doctorate, because when you go to law school in the United States, I don't want to say it's easy, but you can transfer between different law schools because the curriculum at one law school is going to be the same at a different law school. So like I said, for first year, there's like usually 4 core classes that you're required to take as a first year law student. That's going to be true no matter what, wherever you are in the United States. Where you get your specialties in, like entertainment law or international law, is your like clinicals, which is what you're doing during the summers when you're not at school. You'll go work for a law firm that specializes in that. So by the time you graduate, you have some experience in that area. So that being said, if you're actually interested in researching, you definitely won't be researching in law school because it is a very standardized track meant for people who want to be practicing lawyers when they graduate. So I would say in your case, like stick with the doctorate, because if you really want to be a researcher and understand the origin of law, like that is a far better, more applicable degree, I think, to what you want to study than a Juris Doctor degree, because especially if you don't want to be a practicing lawyer.
Great, thank you.
All right, Serena Wallace, I got a hand raised.
My question is regarding the tuition fees and residency and GRE. If is it okay to ask?
Yeah, are you saying for like residency in the United States, is that required to have a graduate degree in the United States?
Yes, I previously been in Hawaii and I just got my citizenship. So I don't know when I'm gonna come back and get the opportunity to get my grad school degree or not. But is it gonna affect tuition fee if you get a citizenship, or are you going to still be considered as an international student?
So if you have American citizenship at that point, it depends on the school. And I will say, like, my knowledge is limited on this. So that's a great, like, embassy type question. If you're not a citizen yet and you're applying for a visa. But I will say, at least from my experience at Baylor University, once you became an American citizen, you no longer were considered an international student. However, on the flip side, if you had spent the majority of your time outside the United States, even if you had citizenship, then you could still apply for certain types of scholarships that apply to international students. So that was typically you'd see that for children of like State Department officials who had pretty much grown up entirely outside the United States because their parents were working in different embassies around the world, still had American citizenship, but they were not considered international students technically because they had that citizenship. However, they were able to apply for some international student scholarships because they had grown up outside the United States. So it's very like nuanced, and I would say it depends on the school. But that's a good conversation for the school that you're applying to. And then especially if you don't have your citizenship yet, then I would talk to the embassy when you're applying for your visa and what that status looks like. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it helps. And also thank you so much for answering that. And also my second question would be regarding the GRE. For some reasons, my mind doesn't comprehend when it comes to math. And I know as far as I know, GRE consists of math tests. So is it any way, do you suggest or you're familiar with regarding this subject when is it all of the universities require GRE, or is it any way to escape from GRE?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because I was kind of had a similar question as you when I was applying for schools because I'm also really bad at math. I managed to avoid ever having to take a math class at undergraduate degree. But I was worried that I would not do well in the GRE. So I had to study a lot for it. But not all graduate programs require GREs these days. So just as some schools in the United States are moving away from like SATs, same with grad schools, they're moving away from like the GRE. But you definitely need to do your research because I don't want to tell you don't take your GRE and then you try to apply to
I think my field requires it. My field is Japanese philology, so it requires theory. But thank you so much for your answer. I appreciate it a lot.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and when it comes to like the GRE, I know that I took it once and like my scores are like, they were okay. So I was really relying on the strength of like a resume and recommendation letters, which helped out a lot. But I know for law school, I could take the GRE or the LSAT, and I'm going to take the LSAT because I don't want a math section. I don't have to do that. So I opted for the LSAT and not the GRE over again. But thank you. All right, William, do you have a question?
Hi, yeah, I have one. I'm really finding it hard to finding out the rankings of the university. I've just did a little bit of research on this, and my university is I was applying for Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in order to be a pilot, and currently I'm studying in a civil aviation university. I'm graduating already, let's say. And I needed to figure out the rankings of the university. And I looked at this New York Times and QS.
USA News.
And yes, and every different, I mean, each site shows different rankings globally and nationally and based on the subject. And the thing is that I couldn't find any specific information about my desired university. Can you suggest something that what can I do in this case to figure out what the rankings of my university?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, you kind of already called it out. It depends on who you ask and what research agency you're looking at, because everyone has a different list. I will say university rankings in the United States is actually kind of controversial right now, because usually I would say like US, like the US News, when they did all of their rankings was considered like the gold standard for like rankings. So if you went there and you looked at US News and what their current rankings are, same with like Forbes. Forbes will publish a list each year of what schools are ranked highest and why. Usually Forbes and then US News were considered like if you got a high ranking school off one of those lists, it was probably pretty accurate. However, that is changing because certain universities have complained that the ranking system is biased and also a bit ambiguous, because like what are they ranking universities off of? Are they ranking off like student satisfaction? Are they ranking off like professors and what their degrees are? Are they ranking off of if students are able to find jobs afterwards? So the whole idea of ranking a university is like what do you rank it on? And so a lot of universities and colleges in the United States have already said that they think rankings are not fair, and they no longer choose to be ranked. So for example, Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, there's a couple other schools, like pretty high-end schools too, have already told the US News, like, we are not going to submit anything to the ranking board this year. Like, we do not want to be ranked. And that's just because they view rankings as unfair. So that being said, I wouldn't get super hung up on rankings. One, because everybody will rank schools differently, and two, even in the United States, it's there's a disagreement of what constitutes like being ranked number one versus number two, because it's all defined by a handful of people on a ranking board. And like the question is like, who are they to determine that my school is number one versus number two, and what are they actually ranking off of? So I wouldn't get too hung up on rankings overall, because I think Embry-Riddle, especially for engineering or flying, great university. And just,
do you know about this university?
Yeah, no, I've had a lot of friends that have gone there. There's two campuses, one in Florida and Dayton, and then another one I think it's in Arizona.
One is Prescott in Arizona, yeah.
Yeah.
And one more question. Do you find that MIT that hard to get selected? I mean, I just want to hear from the natives of USA. I mean, how hard it is to compare it to your payers. I mean,
yeah. So
how smart should you be?
Yeah,
because
MIT.
I have some friends who got 1,580 scored from SAT and got band 8 from IELTS, and they just fail, and I'm like super dismotivated. Like, how hard should we be to get selected for MIT?
Yeah, so I will say like MIT and your Harvards and your Yales, very low acceptance rate, like less than 10% for all applicants that apply. However, I will say that it's hard to judge based off like what your friends, whether they got accepted or not, because every student is different. And every academic year, your admissions counselors may be looking for something slightly different, and not in terms of like scores, but who are they looking for overall as a student. So even with low acceptance rates, I don't think that should discourage you from applying. I will say if you are applying, have like a safety school. So school, my general rule of thumb for a safety school is anything above like 70% acceptance rate. Because that way you know that like, hey, if I don't get into MIT, I at least have another option, and I'm not like, well, I didn't get into any schools and now I have to wait another year to try to apply for something else.
Thanks. By the way, what is that social number? Just some of my friends just applied for university and got accepted last year, and they were just telling about something about social number in USA.
For like social number, not sure if I've heard of that or if I know what you're talking about exactly.
I think he's referring to social security number, if I'm not mistaken.
Social security number.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so that's usually when you're like a citizen. We're all assigned social security numbers at birth. But yeah, you'll need that sometimes for applications. But if you're applying as an international student, it's recognized that you won't have a social security number because you were not born in the United States. So, but yeah, hope that answers your question.
Thank you a lot.
Yep. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Jamila, quick question, Jamila. I know normally when I teach on Tuesdays, I have the TOEFL class afterwards. Are we still good on time if I go a little bit over? Because I want to make sure I answer all of your guys' questions as well.
Yes, we don't have any more classes after this one.
All right, perfect. So I will finish up these next two slides, guys, and then we're going to be at the end of our allotted hour. However, I will still be here for maybe 15-30 minutes afterwards. So as you guys have questions, feel free to ask them, but let me get through these two slides first. And then those of you who need to go because you have other obligations, feel free to. And those of you who want to stay and ask additional questions, do so. But I'm going to get through these next two slides, and then so just hold your questions until afterwards, and then I'll answer them. But for the last two slides, doctor of medicine degree, so your MD, again, you're called doctor, whether you graduate with a doctoral degree or PhD, or a medical doctor. But if you're looking to go to become a medical doctor in the United States, you have to take the MCAT. So whereas the LSAT is for law school, the MCAT is for medical school. It depends on who you talk to, but the general consensus in the United States that the MCAT is probably the hardest single graduate exam you have to take to enter in graduate school. It is a very difficult test because not only does it test how you think, but it also tests your knowledge. And a lot of that knowledge is like in chemistry or advanced biology. So if you're not into either one of those, this is not a test you just want to, come and take without several years of experience studying this stuff. But you have to take an MCAT. On the right-hand side, I have a breakdown of the different sections on the MCAT. But when you go to medical school, you go to school for 4 years. Usually the first 2 years are your academic and your lab sciences. And then your last 2 years, you'll be in clinical. So you'll actually be working at a hospital and you'll be with a professor and you'll be seeing real patients. And you'll also rotate through different specialties. So everyone will do like a rotation in like dermatology. So looking at the medical science behind taking care of your skin, you'll do a rotation through surgery. So some that also helps students realize like what they're passionate about, because some students, they do emergency medicine rotation and they're like, this isn't it, I don't want to do this. And then they do a rotation, pediatrics with kids, and they're like, I prefer family medicine. So doing those rotations your last 2 years are really helpful for medical students to see what type of medicine am I actually passionate about. And then once you graduate medical school after your 4 years, you are called doctor and you have your MD, but you're not a practicing doctor until you graduate residency and or your fellowship. So your residency is, okay, cool, you think you made it to the top, you graduated with a medical degree, but now you have to do your residency, which is where you're working under the supervision of a more experienced doctor at a hospital for 8 to 10 years. So the residency is long. You're also not paid like a doctor during residency. You may make a quarter of your salary. So most medical residents are still really struggling because they have to pay back their medical school loans and they're also making not a lot of money. So that's not to discourage you from becoming a doctor in the United States, but it is a very long process. And if you make it all the way to the end through medical school and your residency, you will make a lot of money as a doctor, but as long as that's great, as long as you're willing to put yourself through 10 to 15 years of schooling and residency and fellowship. So just know what you're getting into before you sign up for all of that, because it will be a very long process of, probably eating. In the United States, we joke that if you can't afford food, you're probably going to be eating, so it's called 1-minute ramen noodles, but that's what college students typically eat. 1-minute ramen noodles, but you'll be doing that for 15 years if you're a doctor. But if that's what your ultimate goal is go for it. Everyone's different of what your ultimate goal is. So who's typically required to get an MD? So all types of medical doctors, and then typically your medical researchers that will be working in a lab, either get their MD or they'll get a doctorate degree in like medical science. But that's for your MD, and then we're going to move on to the last one, and then I'll finish with questions. And this is your Doctor of Dental Surgery degree, or your DDS. So for this one, I don't know if that's an acronym that's funny, but if it is, great. But yeah, for your dental school, you have to take your dental admissions test. There's so many tests. So your DAT, your dental admissions test, I got a breakdown of the different scores. Similar to your MCAT, your medical school test, but arguably not as difficult. And typically, dental school will be 4 years. So your 2 years will be academic based. Your last 2 years will be clinical, similar to medical school, but usually doesn't require residency afterwards. So once you graduate, you're a full-fledged dentist, and you don't have to suffer through, 8 to 10 years of residency afterwards. So dentists are required to get this, and then orthodontists are, I don't know, people that like rearrange your teeth and make sure that your teeth are straight. So slightly different than dentists who mostly clean your teeth. But yeah, so if you want to be a dentist in the United States, then you'd be required to go get this degree after undergraduate. But that ends everything that I have for degrees. So if you need to go, feel free, because we're at the end of our class. But also if you have additional questions, I'll be on for however long you guys have questions for.
Yeah, hello.
Hello.
Yeah, so I am from Nigeria, and I had my undergraduate degree in computer engineering. But right now, I work as an associate pastor in a church. Aside, I have a farm, I have a business here in Nigeria, and I also have a nonprofit that I run with my wife. But I want to study theology. So is it okay if I apply to a US seminary? Because in the future, I want to be a pastor. I want to have my own church in Nigeria. So is it okay if I apply to a US seminary? Is that all right?
Yes, that's a good question. Seems like you've been doing a lot in your life recently, a lot going on. But I will say, yeah, absolutely, you can apply for theology, like master's. Certain like pastors will go get their doctorate as well. I will caveat that when you are applying for seminary, just make sure that you do your research on what that seminary believes. Because unlike law school, where law school is the same standard curriculum no matter what law school you go to, seminaries are very different depending on what their beliefs are and what religious denomination they follow. So just make sure that you fully understand the beliefs of that particular school, because otherwise you might attend and then they might teach something that is contrary to what you believe. but you're stuck at that seminary. So yeah, just make sure you do good research beforehand to make sure that that seminary aligns with your beliefs. Or
All right.
if you're looking for a school that doesn't, go for it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Then if I apply to seminary and I get admitted, what are my chances of being approved at the US Embassy?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, I don't know that because I am on the opposite end of that spectrum. So if it's questions about like visa, might be able to answer like a couple of them, but because I've never had to apply for a visa to come to the United States, because on the flip side, I'm a citizen, not super sure about those questions. I think it all depends on when you talk to the consulate and when you're applying for your visa. That's a good question to ask them.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions? Like I said, I'm here for the next couple of minutes. So, Erkin, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, there is as you know, there is a platform for undergraduate applicants. It's Common App. It makes super easy for applicants. And is there any kind of platform for the people who are looking for their PhD or graduate degree course? So is there any platform like Common App?
Yeah, so you think there would be because the Common App streamlines everything and makes everybody's life easier, but there is not. So especially for your PhDs, because they are so nuanced to your field of study and that school, usually they don't have a Common App. So going back to that example, like Russian literature, like University of Wisconsin, their PhD students focused on like early like Kievan Rus literature. So like it was very like niche. And yeah, so like they focused on that. But if you went to a different university to study Russian literature, then it might be like, hey, this school specializes in 1920s early like Soviet poetry, right? So like there's no like common application because every school is a little bit different. And hey, if you want to spend 10 years of your life researching, 1920s Soviet poetry, like go for it. But yeah, so I will say like every school's a little bit different when it comes to PhD. When it comes to your master's, there is a lot of talk in the United States like, hey, Common App has really worked. So why can't we do a Common App for, your 2 years master's programs? Nothing has happened with that yet in the sense that they've actually moved to a common platform. But I will say certain schools now, like your Ivy League schools, for example, if you apply to one of those, usually you can like check a box and your applications will also be sent to like 3 or 4 other like Ivy League schools. But that's really only applicable to like Ivy League schools and then some like state schools. So for example, if I applied to a school in New York and it was considered a state school, so like State University of New York, they've got like 10 to 15 different locations around New York State. My application would cover all of those schools because it falls under the New York State school system. But if you're looking for like a common application, unfortunately, no, there's not one yet for graduate programs.
I see. Thank you. Yeah, because it makes everything arranged. Like organizing is easy. That's why I'm asking.
No, it's a good question.
There are a lot of information, a lot of materials, because you are confused when you are in. But the Common App helps you to organize everything better than just surfing around.
Yeah, when I first applied to undergraduate schools, like that was like the first or second year that they had the common application. Most schools were like, we don't like the common application. We want you to apply to our school individually. So I had to apply for undergraduate. I think it was like 15 schools individually. And then also on the downside is you also have to pay application fees for all of those schools. So the Common App, now that more schools have like bought into the idea of the Common App and are using the Common App, it 100% makes life easier for students in applying as well.
Definitely. Thank you.
All right, we got another question. looks like, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, but Saida Mikon. Belonging, sorry.
Saida, just Saida.
No,
Said.
it's not Saida. It's Saida Zinhuan.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, my question is, I'm curious, like after all the steps, like after all the studying, graduation, can a student work in the US like after graduating? Because as I know, like the US, it's an easier place to gain kind of experience, and you got me like the question.
Yeah, so
Does university offer to student any work, or does like the student can like work for like the period?
yeah, so it's another visa type question. So different visas when you're applying, like some visas to the United States will allow you to work. Other types of visas will not. So that's all when you're talking to your consular office at the embassy. Those are good questions for the U.S. Embassy in Uzbekistan. And then if you're looking to study or work after you've graduated, usually that will be one of the questions that your consular officer will ask you is, do you intend to work and stay in the United States after you graduate? And that will also help determine them and understand what type of visa you need and are looking for. But that is also a visa question, and I don't want to tell you the wrong answer because I'm not super familiar with the visa process. Because again, I'm on the flip side that if I was coming to Uzbekistan, I'd have to get a visa to visit Uzbekistan, but I've never had to get a visa to go to the United States. So I will turn that over to the consular office if you guys have questions about visas. But I hope that answers your question. All right, looks like Ziodua. And again, I'm sorry if I say your name right.
It's Ziodula actually.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, I study at the university where subjects are taught in English. And my question is, when I apply to graduate programs, will my English proficiency test be waived, or should I still take some English tests?
I would still take an English test because one, it won't hurt. And then two, a lot of schools require you, because if you're checking that box that you're an international student, we're required to have like a TOEFL or something on file that you've taken to make sure that your English language is good. And that's usually true for graduate schools as well. So when in doubt, take the test, I would say, because you'd rather take the test. And then if they ask for it, you have scores instead of trying to scramble and having to take the test to prove your proficiency.
Okay. And one more question. Do they require professional experience in the field to be admitted to the graduate programs?
So it depends on like what type of degree you're going for. So your master's degree, usually not. A lot of times undergraduates will go straight and get their graduate degree. I will say it also depends on the school, because certain schools, like your Ivy League schools, almost expect you to have like 2 years working experience before you go get your master's degree. And then for your PhD, you can also go technically straight either from grad school or undergraduate to go get your PhD. That's not expected necessarily. You have requirements of working in that field. And then for medical school, they usually like to see you have clinical hours. So sometimes as undergraduates, you can, work part-time in a hospital. You get those clinical or lab hours. I know, for example, so I have a twin brother, and he applied to medical school, and as a prerequisite to even go to medical school, he had to have a certain number of clinical hours. And the only way he could get those clinical hours was becoming like an EMT. So he rides in an ambulance. He did that for like 6 months to get the required number of clinical hours for medical school. So that was the only way that he could get the required number of clinical hours. So technically he had to work before he went to medical school. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice day.
Yep. All right, perfect. Serena Wallace.
Sorry, my name is not Serena, it's Shireen actually, but
okay.
Well, my question would be I don't want to annoy you with the same question again. I don't know, I'm not sure if you have information regarding this question, but I know so far I know U.S. education system is quite different than Uzbek education. So I don't know if you have any general idea of how many, I think credits, is that how they call, like credits I should take after I get, I'm not sure, in fact, like I will get my grad degree here or not, but just in case, I just want to know for
So
myself. Yeah.
are you saying like how many credits you should get in the United States when you're attending a graduate school?
So for example, if I have, let's say if I have a degree here, grad school degree here from Uzbekistan, and because US doesn't really, how do I say, consider me as a grad school student, or
Okay.
you know what I'm saying? Does it
Yeah, I
make
see what you're
sense, or-
saying. So I will say it depends on the university, because when you're applying, they'll usually have an option like, hey, have you taken graduate studies somewhere else? And you can click yes, and then they will ask you to submit a transcript. And then it is up to them to evaluate if that transcript from that university is considered valid credits. So sometimes, for example, I had to take like a random like course for my job, and they told me at my job, they're like, hey, you're going to get a certificate for taking this course and it's considered college credit. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I have that certificate, and when I applied to Johns Hopkins, I submitted that transcript and they accepted that like college credit. On the flip side, I also had attended a Russian university in Voronezh, and they did not accept that credit because it was
right? That's what I was talking about.
yeah.
Because
So
it's considered international schooling.
yeah,
I don't
in
know.
that case, it wasn't necessarily because it was an international school. They just didn't recognize like that particular university, but it wasn't like because it was from Russia. If it had been like Moscow
right.
State University, they might have, because I was considered like really prestigious in the United States, they would have probably accepted like that credit. And again, it's dependent on every university, because if you were to tell me like the university name that you attended graduate school in Uzbekistan, I won't be able to tell you like if every school is going to accept it, because it's dependent upon the graduate program that you're applying for. So when you apply, I would absolutely say like, hey, I have all these, credits. Here are my transcripts. Do you recognize them? And they may say yes. They also may say no. And I will say that most schools have a cap for how many degrees that they'll allow you to transfer over to the school, because what they don't want you to do is do like a year and a half somewhere at a university and then transfer to their school, graduate with their name on your diploma, but you didn't attend most of their classes at their university, because essentially when they give you that diploma with that school's name on it, they're saying that that school trained you. So they want to know that most of the credits came from the school that you're attending to get your diploma in. So even if they do accept your credits, they may come back with like, hey, you have 40 credits. We're only going to accept 15 of these. So they may come back with that too.
That's sad, but thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah. Feels like, you finally reach the top and you got to start all over again. I'm sure that's no fun, but.
Well, it is what it is. Thank you.
All right, are there any other questions? All right, well, hearing silence here. So if you guys have any additional questions, I'm gonna pass this recording off to Jamila. And yeah, feel free to reach out to Jamila. She's been super helpful, I know, in all the processes, has been teaching on Tuesday, so she can answer a lot of your questions. And I will be back, I think it's like the 23rd of February. I have to look at my calendar again. I'm going to be teaching another class on online schools, both for undergrad and graduate in the United States. So if you want to stay in Uzbekistan, but you want a degree from the US, beautiful thing of the internet, you can do that now. So we'll talk about that in the next session. And I have a lot of experience with that because I'm getting my online degree technically now, so I can work full time and pay for that degree. But pending any questions, I'm going to let you guys go, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parker.
Right.
So much.
Thank
see
you
you
very
guys.
much,
Thank you.
Andrea, everyone for joining this session. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much again, Andrea. Have a good day and see you later this month for another session.
Yep,
Or-
right. Thank you guys. I'll see you.
See you.
Sign.
Bye.